Commander Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the Earth diplomatic vessel Unity, watching as the Nalaxian space station grew larger in the viewport. The massive structure gleamed like a silver flower, its petals slowly rotating in the darkness of space. Her heart beat faster with each passing moment. This wasn't just her first contact with the Nalaxians, it was humanity's. "Commander, the Nalaxian delegation is ready to receive us," her assistant reported through the intercom. Sarah straightened her dark blue uniform and checked her reflection in the polished surface nearby. At 35, she was young for such an important mission, but her record in xenodiplomacy spoke for itself. "Tell them we're on our way," she replied, her voice steady despite her nerves. The docking procedure went smoothly, and Sarah led her small team through the airlock. The alien architecture immediately caught her attention. Everything seemed to flow and shift, as if the walls themselves were breathing. It wasn't until one of the walls actually moved that Sarah realized they were. "Welcome to Station Harmony," a melodious voice called out. Sarah turned to see 3 Nalaxians approaching. Their silvery skin rippled like mercury, and their bodies seemed to flow rather than walk. The one in the middle, clearly the leader, was tall and elegant, with patterns of light dancing across their skin. But it was the smaller figure to the right that caught Sarah's attention. This Nalaxian was different from the others. While they all had the same metallic skin and fluid grace, there was something in this one's golden eyes that spoke of curiosity rather than diplomatic courtesy. As their gazes met, the young Nalaxian's skin flickered with patterns of blue, a reaction Sarah would later learn meant interest. "I am High Diplomat Vextal," the central figure announced. "With me are Senior Consul Merlock and Junior Diplomat Kiravan." Each Nalaxian bowed in turn, their bodies flowing like liquid metal as they did so. Sarah performed Earth's traditional diplomatic bow. "Commander Sarah Chen, representing the United Earth Government, we are honored by your welcome." As they walked through the station's shifting corridors toward the conference room, Sarah noticed Kiravan falling into step beside her. The young diplomat's skin continued to flicker with patterns of blue and gold. "Your form," Kiravan said softly, her voice carrying a musical quality that seemed common to her species. "It's so consistent." Sarah wasn't sure if this was a compliment or criticism. "We humans tend to maintain our shape," she replied diplomatically. "Fascinating." Kiravan's skin rippled with new patterns. "Most species we encounter have at least some capacity for physical adaptation. But you," she paused, searching for the right words, "you remain unchanged." Before Sarah could respond, they reached the conference room. The space was impressive. A dome-shaped chamber with walls that shifted between transparency and opacity, offering alternating views of space and privacy for their discussions. As the formal introductions began, Sarah caught Kiravan watching her with those golden eyes. There was something in that gaze, concern, warning, that made Sarah's diplomatic instincts tingle. Years of experience had taught her to trust those instincts. The meeting progressed smoothly, with both sides expressing hopes for peaceful cooperation and cultural exchange. But twice more, Sarah noticed Kiravan's skin flashing patterns of deep purple, a color none of the other Nalaxians had displayed. As the session ended and they prepared to return to their respective quarters, Kiravan approached Sarah one final time. The young diplomat's skin had shifted to a muted silver, almost gray. "Commander Chen," she said quietly, glancing around to ensure they weren't overheard, "there's something you should know about my superior's interest in humanity." She hesitated, her form rippling with anxiety. "Not everything is as it appears." Before Sarah could ask for clarification, Kiravan had already flowed away, leaving the human commander with a growing sense of unease about what should have been a straightforward diplomatic mission. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. Kiravan's warning kept playing in her mind. After tossing and turning for hours in her quarters aboard the Unity, she finally got up and switched on her computer terminal. If something wasn't right, there would be clues somewhere in the Nalaxian data they had been given. The clock showed 3 a.m. Earth time when her computer beeped. Sarah sat up straighter, suddenly wide awake. She had found something strange in the Nalaxian research files, repeated mentions of evolutionary stagnation and biological persistence. At first, these terms appeared in ordinary scientific papers, but as she dug deeper, they always seemed to be connected to humans. A soft chime at her door made her jump. When it slid open, Shivering stood there, her silvery form dimmed to almost gray in the low light. "You're looking into the files," Shivering said. It wasn't a question. "I saw your access patterns in the system." Sarah nodded, watching as the young diplomat flowed into the room. "What's really going on here, Shivering?" Shivering's skin rippled with dark patterns of worry. "My people," she began, then stopped. Her form shifted nervously before she continued. "We Nalaxians pride ourselves on adaptation. Change is everything to us. But humans," she gestured at Sarah's unchanging form, "you stay the same, yet you progress. It bothers the High Council deeply." "Bothers them enough to do what?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. "They want to study you. All of you." Shivering moved to the computer and her fingers flowed like liquid metal across the keyboard. Hidden files appeared on the screen. "These are the real research proposals. They plan to take human subjects for adaptation experiments." Sarah's stomach turned as she read the documents. The Nalaxians wanted to test forced physical changes on humans to see if they could make them adapt like other species. The diplomatic mission was just a cover to get close to humanity. "Why are you showing me this?" Sarah asked, looking at Shivering. "You're risking everything." Shivering's form rippled with blue and gold patterns, the same colors Sarah had seen when they first met. "Because it's wrong." "Because," she hesitated, her colors shifting to soft purple, "because in all our meetings, you treated me like a person, not just another shifting form." Sarah stood up and began pacing. "We need evidence, something concrete, to show both our governments." She stopped and looked at Shivering. "Will you help me?" "It's dangerous," Shivering warned, her color darkening. "If we're caught." "I know," Sarah said softly. "But if we don't stop this, innocent people will suffer." Shivering was quiet for a long moment, her form cycling through various colors before settling on a determined silver. "There's a secure database in the lower levels. It contains all the real research plans, but we'll need high-level access codes." "Can you get them?" "Not alone." Shivering's form shimmered with nervous energy. "But together, maybe." They spent the next hour planning. Shivering knew the station's layout and security patterns, while Sarah's diplomatic access could get them past certain checkpoints. It was risky, but they had no choice. As Shivering prepared to leave, she turned back to Sarah. "Why do you trust me?" she asked. "I could be lying, setting a trap." Sarah smiled. "Because when you warned me, your colors showed fear, not for yourself, but for others. Some things can't be faked, even by shapeshifters." Shivering's skin flickered with surprise, then settled into a warm golden glow. "Tomorrow night," she said, "we'll need to move fast before they realize what we've discovered." After Shivering left, Sarah looked out at the stars. Tomorrow they would try to stop a conspiracy and save humanity from becoming unwilling test subjects. But for now, all she could do was wait and hope she had placed her trust in the right ally. The next morning came too quickly. Sarah sat in another diplomatic meeting, trying to look interested while her mind raced with thoughts of tonight's mission. Across the table, Shivering was a perfect picture of calm, her skin showing only appropriate diplomatic patterns of silver and blue. Everything changed when High Diplomat Vextal entered the room unexpectedly. "We have a security breach," Vextal announced, his form rippling with angry red patterns. "Someone accessed restricted files last night." His eyes swept the room, lingering on Shivering. Sarah kept her face neutral, but her heart was pounding. She watched as two security officers flowed into the room, their forms sharp and aggressive. "Junior Diplomat Shivering," Vextal's voice was cold. "You will come with us." Shivering stood slowly, her silver skin now pale and almost transparent with fear. High Diplomat. I. Silence. Vextal's form spiked with dark patterns. Your access codes were used. Your movements were recorded. The only question now is whether you acted alone. Sarah's hand tightened on her chair. She wanted to stand up, to confess her part, but Kiravan's quick glance stopped her. They had discussed this possibility. If caught, Kiravan had a better chance of surviving alone than if they were both accused. The security officers led Kiravan out. The remaining Nalaxians began shifting uncomfortably, their forms showing patterns of distress and confusion. A short recess, Vextal announced. We will continue our discussions after this. Unfortunate matter is handled. Sarah waited 10 minutes before excusing herself. She walked calmly to her quarters, then pulled out the small data device Kiravan had given her just in case. Inside were instructions for an emergency plan. In her quarters, Sarah quickly read through Kiravan's message. The young diplomat had known this might happen and had prepared. There was a way to help her escape during the ceremony of transformation, a major diplomatic event scheduled for that evening. But the plan was dangerous. If it went wrong, both of them could end up worse than dead. The Nalaxians had ways of changing people that went beyond the physical. Sarah's computer chimed with a message. It was from the Nalaxian High Council, officially informing her that Kiravan had been arrested for espionage. They were giving her a choice: undergo psychological realignment or face exile. Realignment. Sarah had read about it in the secret files. It wasn't just changing memories. It was rewriting someone's entire personality. Kiravan would still exist, but everything that made her herself would be gone. Sarah couldn't let that happen. She began preparing, following Kiravan's instructions carefully. The ceremony would have hundreds of witnesses, both human and Nalaxian. The chaos of the traditional mass transformation would provide cover. That evening, Sarah stood with the other diplomats, watching as the Nalaxians prepared for their ceremony. Kiravan was brought in under guard, her form dull and barely moving. The ceremony began. Hundreds of Nalaxians started their ritual transformation, their bodies flowing and changing in a dazzling display. Sarah waited for the signal, a specific pattern of colors that Kiravan had taught her. There, a flash of purple and gold. Sarah moved to act, but something was wrong. The guards weren't where Kiravan's plan had predicted. They were closer, more alert. Stop her. Vextal's voice cut through the chaos. Sarah saw Kiravan's form surge up, trying to flow toward the exit, but the guards were ready. They caught her, their forms merging with hers, holding her in place. The last thing Sarah saw before being dragged away was Kiravan's colors fading to a dull gray as the guards took her toward the realignment chamber. Their perfect plan had just gone horribly, terribly wrong. The journey back to Earth felt longer than any space trip Sarah had ever taken. She sat in her quarters aboard the Unity, expelled from Nalaxian space for diplomatic misconduct. But her thoughts weren't on her ruined career. They were with Kiravan, facing realignment alone. 3 weeks later, Sarah sat before the Earth Defense Council, telling her story for the 20th time. So you believe, Admiral Torres said slowly, that the Nalaxians plan to experiment on humans. I don't believe it. I know it. Sarah pushed forward the data device she had managed to keep hidden. Everything is here. Their research plans, their experiments, their true intentions. The council members looked through the files, their faces growing darker with each document they read. This is disturbing, General Chen said. He wasn't related to Sarah, but his frown reminded her of her father's. But without Kiravan's testimony, we have no way to prove these weren't falsified. Sarah clenched her fists under the table. Request access to their realignment facilities. If you see what they're doing to her. Commander Chen. Admiral Torres cut in. You're dismissed. The council needs to discuss this privately. Back in her small apartment in Washington, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept checking her computer for any news from Nalaxian space. Finally, after a month of searching, she found something. A public broadcast of a diplomatic ceremony. There was Kiravan, standing beside Vextal. But she looked wrong. Her form, once full of expressive colors and patterns, now stayed a steady diplomatic silver. Her movements were perfect, practiced, empty. Sarah watched as Kiravan gave a speech about unity and cooperation. Every word was correct, proper, and completely unlike the curious, caring person Sarah had known. But then something happened. As Kiravan spoke about the unchanging nature of friendship between their species, her skin flickered briefly with a pattern of purple and gold, the same color she had shown when she first met Sarah. The camera quickly cut away, but Sarah sat up straighter. Somewhere inside that diplomatically perfect exterior, the real Kiravan was still fighting. Months passed. Sarah worked her way up through Earth's diplomatic court again, this time in the newly formed Department of Sinological Defense. She used her position to quietly block any research agreements with the Nalaxians that involved human subjects. Every few weeks, she would catch glimpses of Kiravan in diplomatic broadcasts. Each time, she looked for those brief flashes of true color beneath the perfect silver exterior. Sometimes she saw nothing. But sometimes, just sometimes, there would be a flicker of purple, a flash of gold, a moment of the real Kiravan shining through. "They can't erase everything," Sarah whispered to her computer screen one night, after seeing Kiravan give another empty speech. "Some things don't change, no matter how hard they try." 5 years passed this way. Sarah rose to become Earth's Director of Xenodiplomacy, using her position to protect humanity from threats that most people never knew existed. She built a reputation for being tough but fair in diplomatic negotiations, especially with species that showed too much interest in human biology. Then one day, a new proposal arrived from the Nalaxian Empire. They wanted to start a joint research initiative, studying the advantages of both changeable and unchanging species, and there, listed among the delegation members, was a familiar name: Senior Diplomat Kiravan. Sarah stared at the name for a long time. After 5 years, they would meet again. But would there be anything left of the Kiravan she had known? Or would she face only the perfect, empty diplomat they had created? She had to know. Sarah sent her approval for the initiative and began preparing for a reunion she had both longed for and dreaded for 5 long years. The new Nalaxian delegation arrived on a sunny morning in Geneva. Sarah stood at the landing pad, watching their ship descend like a silver teardrop from the sky. Her hands were clasped behind her back to hide their slight trembling. "Director Chen," her assistant whispered, "they're ready to disembark." Sarah nodded, keeping her face carefully neutral. 5 years of diplomatic work had made her good at hiding her emotions. She would need that skill now more than ever. The ship's door opened with a soft hiss. High Diplomat Vextal emerged first, his form flowing with the same aggressive grace Sarah remembered. Behind him came 3 other Nalaxians, their forms shifting in the standard diplomatic patterns. Then came Kiravan. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Kiravan's form was different now, taller, more imposing, with none of the curious ripples and color changes that had once made her so unique. Her surface maintained a perfect, unbroken silver sheen. "Director Chen," Vextal said, his form rippling in what might have been amusement. "How good to see you again after all these years." "High Diplomat," Sarah replied evenly. "Welcome to Earth." She forced herself to look at each member of the delegation in turn. When her eyes met Kiravan's, she saw nothing. No recognition, no flash of color, no sign of the person she had known. "Senior Diplomat Kiravan will be leading our research team," Vextal announced. "She has particular insight into human nature." Kiravan bowed perfectly. "Director Chen, your reputation precedes you." Her voice was different too. All music and no warmth. They moved to the conference room where the research initiative would be discussed. Sarah presented Earth's proposal, a study of how different species adapt to challenges through various means. "Fascinating approach," Kiravan said, her form still perfectly silver. "You suggest that physical stability might offer advantages." "Yes," Sarah replied, pulling up data on the display. "While your people adapt through physical change, We adapt through technology and cultural evolution. Both approaches have merit. As she spoke, Sarah noticed something. For just a moment, when she mentioned cultural evolution, Caravan's surface had rippled slightly, not the diplomatic patterns, but something more natural. We have prepared research facilities, Sarah continued, watching carefully. Your team will have access to our technological development archives, while we study your species' transformation abilities. Very thorough, Vextal commented. Caravan, you'll oversee the daily operations. Your experience with humans makes you uniquely qualified. Was that a flicker of purple beneath Caravan's silver surface? It was gone so fast, Sarah couldn't be sure. The meeting continued for hours. Sarah presented more plans, carefully designed to keep the Nalaxians away from any human test subjects, while still providing valuable research opportunities. As the session ended, Caravan stayed behind to review some documents. Sarah deliberately took her time gathering her materials. The facilities are impressive, Caravan said without looking up. You've clearly put much thought into this. Things change, Sarah replied carefully, but some principles remain constant. For just a second, so brief Sarah almost missed it. Caravan's form flashed with a pattern of gold and purple. Then it was gone, replaced by the perfect silver surface. Indeed they do, Director Chen. Caravan turned to leave, then paused. It will be interesting to see what this research reveals about the nature of change and consistency. Sarah watched her go, hope rising in her chest for the first time in 5 years. Somewhere under that perfect silver surface, something of the real Caravan remained. The question was, how much, and could it break free? 2 weeks into the research initiative, Sarah sat in her office reviewing the latest data. The wall screen showed side-by-side comparisons, Nalaxian adaptation versus human innovation. Something in the patterns caught her eye. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Caravan, right on schedule for their daily meeting. Director Chen, Caravan said, her form the usual diplomatic silver. I have questions about these human development cycles. Sarah nodded to a chair. What puzzles you? Your people faced the same environmental challenges as ours, Caravan said, calling up historical data. Extreme temperatures, hostile predators, resource scarcity. We adapted our bodies. You remained the same, yet. Her form rippled slightly. You survived. Thrived, even. Look at this, Sarah said, pulling up an image of ancient human cave paintings next to modern spacecraft designs. While your people changed their bodies to fly, we dreamed of flying. Then we built wings. When we needed to survive in space, we didn't adapt our bodies. We created ships and suits. Caravan's surface flickered with familiar colors for a moment. But surely physical adaptation is more efficient. Is it? Sarah stood and walked to the wall screen. Your people can change their forms instantly. But look at human history. Each challenge we faced forced us to think, to create, to build. Each solution became a stepping stone to the next innovation. She brought up more images. The first wheel, the first steam engine, the first computer. Because we couldn't change our bodies, we had to change our world. And in doing so, we learned to change entire planets. Caravan was silent, her form showing more ripples of color than Sarah had seen since their reunion. Our records show your species is stagnant, unchanging. Physical stability gave us mental flexibility, Sarah explained. We couldn't adapt our bodies to new worlds, so we learned to adapt new worlds to us. Terraforming, atmospheric processors, gravity generators, all because we had to solve problems without changing ourselves. But the cost, Caravan began, then stopped as memories seemed to surface. Her form swirled with purple and gold. I remember discussing this with someone before. Sarah's heart beat faster, but she kept her voice steady. What do you remember? Pain, Caravan whispered, her surface rippling with dark colors. Someone was worried about pain. About experiments. She shook herself, the silver surface returning. I apologized, Director. Sometimes old data fragments surface inappropriately. It's not inappropriate, Sarah said gently. It's part of who you are. Who I was, Caravan corrected, but her voice held a note of uncertainty. The realignment corrected my irregular thoughts. Did it? Sarah brought up one last image, an early photograph of a human mother holding her child. Some things don't need to change to be perfect. Some things are strongest when they stay true to what they are. Caravan stared at the image, her form shifting through a rainbow of colors. I need to process this data, she said quickly, standing to leave. But at the door, she paused. Director Chen, Sarah, have we had this conversation before? About things staying the same? Sarah smiled softly. Maybe not this exact conversation, but similar ones, yes. Caravan's form showed a complex pattern of colors Sarah had never seen before. Confusion, recognition, and something like hope all mixed together. Then the silver surface returned, but it seemed less perfect now, less certain. Thank you for the insights, Director, Caravan said formally. I will consider what you've shown me about human adaptation and about consistency. After she left, Sarah logged a new entry in her private records. Memory breakthrough confirmed. The real Caravan is still in there, fighting to remember. And maybe, just maybe, our human inability to change will help her find the strength to change back. Caravan sat alone in her quarters that night, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her silver surface wasn't perfect anymore. Ripples of color kept breaking through, like waves under ice. The more time she spent with Sarah, the harder it became to maintain the calm, diplomatic appearance she had worn for 5 years. Who am I? She whispered to her reflection. Her form shifted between silver and swirling patterns of purple and gold, the colors that felt right somehow, even though they weren't diplomatic standard. A memory flashed through her mind. Standing in different quarters, warning someone about danger. Sarah's face, younger but with the same determined expression. The memory brought pain, but also something else, a feeling of rightness, of being truly herself. The door chimed. Enter, Caravan called, quickly trying to steady her surface. It was High Diplomat Vextal. Senior Diplomat, he said, his form sharp and businesslike. Your reports have been concerning. Concerning. Caravan kept her voice neutral. Your color patterns during meetings. Your increasing focus on human unchanging nature. Some worry you're old. Irregularities are returning. Caravan felt cold fear, but underneath it was anger, hot and familiar. The research requires understanding human perspective, she said carefully. Perhaps. Vextal moved closer, his form looming over her. Or perhaps you need realignment renewal. It has been 5 years. Another memory hit her. The realignment chamber, the pain, the feeling of herself being erased. Her form rippled violently with the memory. No, she said, surprising both of them. I mean, that won't be necessary, High Diplomat. Vextal studied her for a long moment. We'll discuss this tomorrow. Rest well, Senior Diplomat. After he left, Caravan moved quickly to her computer. Her hands shook as she accessed old files, diplomatic records from 5 years ago. She found what she was looking for, security footage from the failed escape attempt. She watched as her past self tried to flee during the ceremony, watched as the guards caught her, watched Sarah being dragged away. The memories came flooding back, no longer as data fragments, but as real lived experiences. Sarah, she whispered. She remembered everything now. Their friendship, the conspiracy they uncovered, their plan to expose the truth. Her form swirled with emotions she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The door chimed again. When it opened, Sarah stood there. I saw Vextal leaving. Sarah said quietly, Are you all right? Caravan tried to speak but couldn't. Instead, her form shifted to show exactly what she was feeling. A symphony of colors and patterns that no properly realigned Nalaxian would ever display. You remember, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. Everything. Caravan's voice shook. They tried to erase it all, but seeing you again, learning about human consistency, it helped me remember who I really am. Sarah stepped inside, letting the door close. And who is that? Someone who believes in right and wrong. Someone who saw the truth about humanity's strength. Caravan's form settled into the natural patterns she had once worn so freely. Someone who was your friend. Is my friend, Sarah corrected gently. Tears, something Nalaxians rarely showed, formed in Caravan's eyes. They'll try to realign me again. Vextal already suspects. Then we'll stop them, Sarah said firmly. Together, like before. But this time, we're smarter and better prepared. Caravan looked at her friend, the human who had reminded her that sometimes not changing was the greatest strength of all. Together, she agreed. Her form glowed with determination and hope. But Sarah, if something goes wrong. It won't, Sarah said. Some things don't change, remember. Including the fact that I don't abandon my friends. Outside Caravan's window, Earth's moon shone bright and constant, just as it had for billions of years. Like humanity, it had never needed to change to be exactly what it needed to be. The next morning, Sarah called an emergency meeting of both human and Nalaxian delegations. Her hands were steady as she prepared the presentation files, but her heart was racing. Beside her, Caravan stood tall, her form showing its true colors for the first time in 5 years. Are you ready? Sarah asked quietly. No, Caravan admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. The conference room filled quickly. Vextal sat at the front, his form showing irritation at the unexpected meeting. Young Nalaxian scientists filled the back rows, their forms rippling with curiosity. Thank you all for coming, Sarah began. We've made an important discovery about adaptation and change. She nodded to Caravan. Caravan stepped forward, her form bright with determination. What I'm about to show you isn't about human adaptation. It's about what our government does to Nalaxians who think differently. The room went silent. Vextal started to rise, but Sarah was ready. She activated the room's containment field, keeping him in place. Play the footage, Sarah commanded. The wall screens lit up with video from the realignment chambers. They showed Nalaxians strapped down, their forms forced to change against their will. The sound of their screams filled the room. This is what happened to me, Caravan said, her voice strong. This is what happens to anyone who questions our obsession with constant change. The young scientists in the back were showing patterns of shock and horror. Some of their forms had gone almost transparent with distress. Lies, Vextal shouted, his form spiky with rage. This is human propaganda. No, Caravan replied. She brought up more files, the one she and Sarah had gathered 5 years ago, along with new evidence from the research initiative. These are records from our own system. The realignment program has been running for decades. A young scientist stood up, her form swirling with angry colors. My sister disappeared last year. They said she went to a special research post, but others began speaking up. More stories of missing friends and family emerged. Caravan's revelation had broken a dam of silence. The humans taught me something important, Caravan continued. True strength isn't about changing your form. It's about staying true to who you are, even when others try to force you to change. Sarah stepped forward. The Earth government offers sanctuary to any Nalaxian who fears realignment. We believe in the right to remain unchanging. The room erupted in chaos. Young Nalaxians were showing color patterns never seen in diplomatic meetings. Anger, hope, rebellion. Vextal and his supporters were surrounded by their own people, their forms held in check by the combined will of the younger generation. News spread quickly through the station's communication systems. Similar rebellions broke out on Nalaxian ships and colonies. Young Nalaxians everywhere began showing their true colors, refusing to hold diplomatic patterns. This is only the beginning, Sarah warned Caravan as they watched the revolution unfold. The High Council won't give up easily. No, Caravan agreed, but neither will we. Our young people have seen the truth. that forcing change is no better than forcing stagnation. They want the freedom to be themselves. Messages of support began flooding in from Nalaxian worlds. The younger generation had been waiting for this moment, tired of being forced to change, tired of hiding their true forms. By sunset, the research station had become the headquarters of a new movement. Young Nalaxians called it the True Form Revolution, the right to change or stay the same as they chose. Shivering stood at the window, watching Earth's unchanging moon rise. "Thank you," she said to Sarah, "for showing us that sometimes the greatest change is learning to accept yourself as you are." "That's the funny thing about change," Sarah replied with a smile. "Sometimes it looks a lot like staying exactly the same." 5 years after the True Form Revolution, Sarah stood in a new diplomatic chamber on the Nalaxian homeworld. The room looked different from the ones she remembered. The walls no longer shifted and flowed. Instead, they stayed in simple, beautiful patterns that the Nalaxians had chosen for themselves. She was here for the signing of the final Freedom Accord, a treaty guaranteeing every Nalaxian's right to maintain their chosen form. The old High Council was gone, replaced by leaders chosen for their wisdom rather than their ability to change. Sarah watched as delegates arrived. Some showed traditional diplomatic patterns, others displayed wild colors and shapes, and many simply maintained their natural forms. No one was forced to change anymore. The main doors opened, and the new Nalaxian leader entered. Sarah's heart beat faster as she saw Shivering, now first speaker of the Reformed Council, walk into the room. Her form glowed with the same purple and gold patterns that Sarah had first seen 10 years ago. Their eyes met across the room. Shivering walked over, her movements graceful and natural. No more forced diplomatic flowing. "Director Chen," Shivering said formally, then broke into a warm smile. "Sarah." "First speaker," Sarah replied with equal warmth. "The chamber looks beautiful. We kept the best parts of our changing nature," Shivering explained, gesturing to the subtle patterns in the walls. "But we no longer change just for the sake of change." Sarah looked at her old friend carefully. "You seem happy." "I am." Shiverin's form rippled with joy, an expression that would have been forbidden in the old days. "Our people are free now. Free to change, free to stay the same, free to be who they truly are." They walked together to a quiet corner of the chamber, away from the other delegates. Shivering turned to Sarah, her form shifting to show the deeper emotions she was feeling. "You know," Shivering said softly, "I sometimes think about that day 10 years ago, when we first met. I was so fascinated by your unchanging nature." "And now?" Sarah asked. The alien woman looked at her and shivered. "You haven't changed," she said, but this time, her voice held wonder rather than criticism. Sarah smiled. "Neither have you, not where it matters." "That's what you helped us understand," Shivering replied. "That true change isn't about shifting your form. It's about growing as a person while staying true to yourself." Around them, delegates began taking their places for the signing ceremony. Young Nalaxians moved freely among the older ones, their forms showing every color imaginable. No one tried to hide their true patterns anymore. "Will you stay for the celebration?" Shivering asked. "There's going to be a display of traditional forms, patterns our people haven't shown in public for generations." "I wouldn't miss it," Sarah said. "Someone once told me that the best way to understand a people is to see them when they're truly themselves." Shivering laughed, her form sparkling with happiness. "Sounds like a wise person." She was, Sarah agreed. She just needed a reminder that wisdom doesn't always mean changing everything about yourself. As they took their places for the ceremony, Sarah looked at her friend. Still the same curious, caring person she had met a decade ago, now free to show her true colors to the world. Sometimes, Sarah thought, the greatest victories came not from changing people, but from helping them find the courage to stay true to who they really were. The signing began, marking the official end of forced changes in Nalaxian society. But for Sarah and Shivering, it marked something else too. The triumph of friendship over fear, of truth over appearances, and of the strength that comes from being exactly who you are.